The factory sat at the edge of town like a rusted thought no one wanted to finish. Ethan Caldwell had driven past it his entire childhood, an enormous concrete carcass hunched behind a chain-link fence, its windows punched out like missing teeth. As a kid, he'd believed monsters lived inside. As an adult structural engineer, he told himself monsters didn't exist, only rot, stress fractures, and deferred maintenance. Still, as he parked the truck and cut the engine, his hands lingered on the steering wheel longer than necessary. The sign on the fence was new. Demolition scheduled, site assessment in progress. Bright yellow. Optimistic. A lie. The air smelled wrong. Not just rust and oil, but something older, burnt grease soaked into concrete, mixed with a faint sweetness that reminded Ethan unpleasantly of overheated wiring, or meat left too long in the sun. "Let's get this over with," said Marla Reyes, tugging her hard hat into place. She was the project lead, efficient and sharp, the kind of woman who believed fear was a waste of calories. 2 days tops. We map the damage, flag hazards, and this place gets erased. Behind her, Jonah Pike adjusted his recorder. The environmental consultant had insisted on documenting everything for compliance, but Ethan noticed Jonah's eyes kept drifting to the upper floors, as if expecting movement. The fourth member of the team, Liam Brooks, said nothing. The demolition contractor stood slightly apart, boots planted too firmly, staring at the factory doors like they might breathe. Ethan noticed that too. The doors were massive steel slabs, streaked with corrosion. A faint vibration trembled beneath Ethan's fingertips when he pushed them open. "Probably wind pressure," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The doors groaned inward. The sound echoed far longer than it should have. Inside, the factory was dim, illuminated only by thin beams of daylight stabbing through broken skylights. Dust floated thick in the air, swirling like ash. Rows of silent machines stretched into the darkness, conveyor belts, stamping presses, assembly arms frozen mid-task. It felt less like a building and more like a body paused between breaths. "Power's been cut for decades," Marla said, checking her tablet. "Officially shut down after the accident in '87. The accident? Ethan didn't need to ask. Everyone in town knew the story, even if no one liked to tell it. A night shift. A malfunctioning pressure system. Fire, smoke, collapse. Official death count, 11. Unofficial rumors said more, migrant workers, temp laborers, names never recorded. Progress had moved on. The factory hadn't. As they stepped farther in, Ethan felt something else, an almost imperceptible pressure behind his eyes, like standing too close to heavy machinery. His ears rang softly. Then he heard it. A clank. Metal striking metal. They all froze. "That's not funny," Jonah said, voice tight. Another sound followed, a low, rhythmic whir. A conveyor belt jerked. Just an inch. Then another. Dust cascaded from the ceiling as the belt shuddered to life, rolling forward with a dry, rasping groan. "That's impossible," Marla snapped. "There's no power source." As if offended by the challenge, overhead lights flickered. One by one, dim bulbs sputtered on, bathing the factory floor in sickly yellow light. Shadows stretched and warped, clinging to the machines like oil stains. Ethan's heart hammered. He moved toward the main control panel, its surface layered with grime. The gauges twitched. Needles trembled as if responding to unseen hands. Then the voices began. At first, they were distant, murmurs woven into the machinery's rhythm. Indistinct words, overlapping, exhausted. "Keep it moving. No breaks. Quotas not met." Jonah's recorder slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Liam backed toward the door. "We shouldn't be here." Ethan swallowed hard. The voices grew clearer the deeper they went. As if the factory were tuning itself to them. As they passed a row of stamping presses, Ethan felt a sharp pain lance through his wrist. He gasped, clutching it, and suddenly he wasn't there anymore. He was younger. Sweating. Standing at a workstation while a supervisor shouted over the noise. The press slammed down again and again, faster than it should, his hands aching, blistered. He smelled burning oil. He knew something was wrong, but the line wouldn't stop. Don't slow it down. The vision snapped away. Ethan staggered, heart racing. You okay? Marla asked, but her eyes were unfocused, distant, haunted. She was seeing something too. The factory groaned around them, machines sinking into a coordinated rhythm. Conveyors rolled. Pistons pumped. Gears turned with grinding insistence. The factory was working. Not for profit. For memory. Above them, a loudspeaker crackled to life. A distorted voice boomed through the hall, flat, emotionless, endlessly patient. Shift has begun. Ethan felt a cold certainty settle into his bones. This place wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. The loudspeaker crackled again, louder this time, as if clearing its throat. All workers report to assigned stations. The words echoed through the factory, bouncing off concrete and steel until they no longer sounded like a recording, but a command issued moments ago. Liam bolted. He didn't shout. Didn't warn them. 1 second he was there, pale and shaking, the next he was sprinting toward the entrance, boots slapping against the concrete. His breath came out in sharp, panicked bursts. Liam, wait! Marla yelled. Too late. The steel doors slammed shut with a thunderous clang, shaking dust from the rafters. Liam crashed into them, pounding with both fists. They're locked, he screamed. They're locked, open the damn doors. Ethan ran to the control panel near the entrance. The switches were corroded, labels peeled away, but the system lights glowed faintly beneath the grime. There was no power line feeding them. The factory was generating its own. Behind them, the machines grew louder. Conveyor belts sped up, rattling violently. A stamping press slammed down, narrowly missing empty space where a worker should have been standing. Jonah crouched near a wall, hands clamped over his ears. It's getting inside my head, he muttered. It's not sound, it's memory. Ethan felt it too. The pressure behind his eyes deepened, like invisible fingers pressing inward. With every step deeper into the factory, the air thickened, heavy with exhaustion and despair. A bell rang. Sharp. Metallic. Shift change. Lights overhead brightened, flickering violently before stabilizing. The factory floor no longer looked abandoned. Fresh oil gleamed on the machinery. Tools appeared neatly arranged beside workstations. Time had folded in on itself, peeling back decades of decay. Then the figures emerged. At first, they looked like shadows cast by moving parts, elongated, distorted. But as they drew closer, Ethan saw them clearly. Workers. Dozens of them. Men and women in oil-stained uniforms. Faces gray and hollow, eyes sunken with bone-deep fatigue. Some were missing fingers. Others bore burns that never healed. Their movements were stiff, mechanical, as if guided by something other than muscle and bone. None of them acknowledged the team. They took their places along the line. A worker brushed past Ethan, and the cold that radiated from the figure made his skin prickle. He caught a glimpse of the man's face, young, no older than 20, and felt a sudden surge of grief so intense it stole his breath. The boy's lips moved. No overtime pay, he whispered. Then the conveyor belt dragged him forward. Marla stumbled back, her tough exterior cracking. This isn't possible, she said, though her voice trembled. Stress hallucinations. Group psychosis. But she wasn't convincing herself. The factory lurched, responding to their denial with irritation. A siren wailed overhead, deep and mournful, like a wounded animal. Ethan's vision blurred again. This time, he stood in an office overlooking the factory floor. Papers stacked neatly on a desk. Safety reports buried beneath production charts. He recognized the feeling immediately, authority without consequence. A voice, his own, cold and detached. Delays cost money. He recoiled as the vision collapsed. Ethan gasped, dropping to one knee. "This place is judging us," Jonah said hoarsely. "It's not haunting us randomly. It's assigning blame." A conveyor belt beside them jolted violently. Liam screamed as his foot was caught, dragged inches before Ethan lunged forward and yanked him free. Liam sobbed openly now. "I just wanted the contract," he cried. "I didn't know they cut corners. I didn't know people died." The factory did not respond with mercy. The workers on the line turned their heads in unison. Their eyes locked onto Liam. For the first time, they looked aware. The belt surged forward. Cold hands seized Liam's arms, pulling him toward the press. He fought, screaming, heels scraping uselessly against the concrete. "No, please, I quit, I quit." The stamping press slammed down. Ethan looked away too late. The sound was wet. When the press lifted, there was nothing left of Liam but a dark stain spreading across the belt, absorbed greedily by the machinery. The workers resumed their tasks without pause. The loudspeaker crackled again. Incident logged. Marla vomited. Jonah sank to the floor, rocking, whispering apologies to no one. Ethan stood frozen, realization settling like a blade in his chest. This factory didn't want them dead. It wanted them to understand. The lights dimmed slightly, as if satisfied, for now. Somewhere deep within the building, a massive engine turned, slow and deliberate, preparing the next phase. The assembly line never stopped. And neither did the reckoning. The factory did not mourn Liam. His absence was absorbed instantly, like a missing cog replaced by pressure alone. The conveyor belt carried on, slick and dark, humming with renewed purpose. Whatever warmth had once belonged to this place was gone. The air turned colder, sharper, carrying a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat. Marla wiped her mouth with the back of her glove, her hands shaking despite her effort to steady them. "We can't stay here," she said, but her voice lacked authority now. "There has to be an emergency exit. Old factories always have redundancies." Ethan nodded, though his thoughts felt sluggish, as if the building itself were dulling them. Jonah hadn't stood up yet. He sat on the floor, staring at the stain where Liam had been, his recorder still running beside him, red light blinking like a quiet accusation. "Jonah," Ethan said. "We need you." Jonah looked up slowly. His eyes were bloodshot. "It's recording everything," he murmured. "But it's not for us. It's for them." Before Ethan could ask what he meant, a new sound cut through the machinery, a high-pitched beep, sharp and precise. A quality control alarm. A section of the floor ahead illuminated in harsh white light. The workers shuffled aside, clearing a path. From the shadows emerged a long inspection corridor, walls tiled in cracked white ceramic, streaked with rust that looked disturbingly like dried blood. At the corridor's entrance hung a sign, letters peeling but legible. "Quality control, defects will be addressed." The factory lights dimmed everywhere else, funneling attention forward. "It wants us to go there," Marla said. "And if we don't?" Ethan asked. As if answering, the stamping presses behind them slammed down in rapid succession, shaking the floor. The message was clear. They moved. The corridor smelled of antiseptic and rot. Overhead lights flickered in a slow, deliberate rhythm, each flicker revealing something new scratched into the tiles, names. "Dates, please for mercy carved with fingernails or tools." Jonah reached out and traced one. "These are real," he whispered. These people didn't die in the accident. They died afterward. Ethan felt a tightening in his chest. He had reviewed the reports years ago as part of a redevelopment proposal. Fatalities capped at 11. The rest categorized as non-lethal injuries or unconfirmed presence. He hadn't questioned it. The corridor opened into a large inspection bay. In the center stood a massive steel table fitted with restraints, leather straps cracked with age, metal clasps polished smooth by use. Above it hung a mechanical arm ending in a cluster of tools, drills, saws, welding torches. All spotless. All waiting. Marla backed away. No. Absolutely not. The loudspeaker crackled softly, almost soothing. Quality issues detected. The workers lined the walls, their hollow eyes reflecting the bright inspection lights. One of them stepped forward, a woman with half her face scarred by burns, her jaw hanging slightly crooked. She raised a finger and pointed at Marla. No, Marla said, shaking her head. I didn't do this. I wasn't even here back then. The woman's lips trembled. Her voice, when it came, was layered, hers and many others speaking through her. You approved the extension, the voice said. You ignored the warnings. Marla screamed as the vision took hold. She was in a boardroom, polished table gleaming. Blueprints spread out. An engineer spoke nervously about structural fatigue, about overworked systems. Marla, laughed it off. It'll hold, she said. If it doesn't, we'll deal with it later. Later never came for them. Marla collapsed to her knees, sobbing. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear, I didn't know. The straps on the inspection table snapped open. The mechanical arm whirred to life. Ethan moved without thinking. He grabbed Marla's arm, pulling her back. Enough, he shouted. She knows now. We all do. The factory paused. The machines slowed, their rhythm faltering. The workers tilted their heads in unison, as if listening to something deeper than sound. Jonah stood shakily, his voice barely steady. This isn't about punishment, he said. It's about acknowledgement. You want us to see you. To say your names. To admit what happened. The lights flickered violently. A low groan reverberated through the walls, like the building exhaling decades of suppressed rage. Then, slowly, the mechanical arm powered down. The straps retracted. The woman stepped back into the line of workers, her expression unreadable. The loudspeaker spoke again, colder now. Partial compliance noted. Ethan's stomach dropped. Partial. Marla whispered. The inspection lights dimmed, and a new section of the factory roared to life beyond the bay. Deeper. Older. Louder. The sound carried with it something worse than anger. Expectation. The factory was not finished with them. It had more defects to inspect. And more truths to extract. The factory changed its rhythm. It no longer roared with chaotic violence or lashed out blindly. After partial compliance, it settled into something far more terrifying, routine. The machines synchronized into a steady, relentless cadence, each sound clicking neatly into the next like a massive clock that had begun counting again. Overtime. Ethan felt it immediately. A pressure in his chest, a heaviness in his limbs, like his body was being weighed down by invisible hours. His legs ached as if he had been standing too long. His eyes burned. He hadn't done any real labor, yet exhaustion seeped into his bones. Marla leaned against the wall, breathing hard. I feel tired, she said, confused. Like I've been here all night. Jonah checked his watch. The digital display flickered wildly, 12:03. 12:03. 12:03, time, like power, belonged to the factory now. The loudspeaker hummed softly, almost kindly. Mandatory overtime in effect. The workers began to move again, but slower this time. Their shoulders sagged. Their movements were heavy, resentful. Several limped. One collapsed briefly, only to be hauled upright by unseen force and shoved back into place. Ethan felt something brush his mind, a whisper, not quite a voice. "You don't get to leave when you're tired." The factory floor stretched unnaturally ahead of them as they were herded deeper inside. Hallways elongated, doors multiplying where there had been none. Each step felt harder than the last, as if gravity itself was being adjusted to simulate fatigue. They passed a break room. The word break hung crookedly above the door, half the letters missing. Inside, the room was pristine, too pristine. Plastic chairs bolted to the floor. A vending machine stocked with items that didn't exist anymore. A clock on the wall with no hands. A worker sat at one of the tables, head bowed. When Ethan glanced at him, the man looked up. His face was Ethan's. Same eyes. Same crooked scar on the chin. Same tired resignation. The vision hit like a blow. Ethan was younger again, reviewing safety logs late at night. A report blinked on his screen, fatigue-related errors increasing, machinery failures spiking during extended shifts. He hovered over the delay production recommendation. Then he closed the file. "We'll manage," he told himself. "They can push a little harder." The break room dissolved. Ethan staggered, clutching his head. Jonah caught him before he fell. "That's how it works," Jonah said hoarsely. "It makes you live the cost. Not just see it." Marla's voice trembled. "How do we stop it?" Jonah looked around, eyes hollow. "I don't think it wants to be stopped. I think it wants to finish the shift." The factory responded with a sudden drop in temperature. Breath fogged in the air. The lights dimmed, flickering in slow pulses that matched the workers' steps. A siren blared, long and mournful. Productivity declining. The floor beneath Marla split open with a shriek of tearing metal. A section of the conveyor line rose from below, twisting into a grotesque parody of a workstation, controls positioned too high, pedals too far apart. A chair slammed into place behind her, forcing her down. "No," she screamed, struggling as restraints snapped around her wrists and ankles. Ethan rushed forward, but the workers blocked his path. Their faces were no longer passive. There was anger there now. And something like relief. "She's not a worker," Ethan shouted. "She's management." A worker turned slowly toward him. His voice was weak, cracked with bitterness. "Management works us too." The workstation powered up. Marla cried out as the controls began to move on their own, forcing her arms to repeat the same motion over and over. Faster. Harder. Her muscles strained, tendons screaming. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm sorry, I see it now, I see all of it." The factory hesitated. Ethan pushed forward, ignoring the hands grabbing at him. "Then let her stop," he yelled. "Let her rest." The word rest echoed. Strangely, as if foreign. The machine slowed, but did not stop. The loudspeaker crackled, voice colder than before. "Rest not scheduled." Marla's strength failed. Her head dropped forward, breath coming in ragged gasps. Jonah shouted, voice breaking. "Enough. You don't need more suffering. You need to be remembered." Silence rippled outward. The machine stuttered. The conveyor belt juddered to a halt. The restraints released with a sharp snap. Marla collapsed to the floor, shaking, alive. The workers stepped back, uncertain. The loudspeaker hissed. Unapproved pause logged. Ethan knew then that they were not winning. They were bargaining, moment by moment, confession by confession, against something that measured justice in shifts and quotas. Somewhere far below them, a deeper engine engaged. A system older than the factory itself. The lights ahead glowed red. The night shift was beginning. And overtime, Ethan realized with horror, never truly ended here. The red lights did not blink. They burned steadily, bathing the factory in a low, feverish glow that erased depth and distance. Shadows pooled thickly in corners, stretching upward like stains that refused to be cleaned. The air grew heavier, warmer now, thick with the smell of sweat, oil, and something faintly electrical, ozone mixed with decay. Ethan felt it settle into his spine. Night shift. The workers changed. Their movements became sharper, more desperate. The sluggish fatigue of overtime hardened into something brittle and angry. Faces tightened. Jaws clenched. These were not the ghosts of people who still hoped to go home. These were the ones who had learned there would be no morning. Marla lay on the floor, barely conscious. Jonah knelt beside her, whispering her name, slapping her cheek gently until her eyes fluttered open. "I can't feel my hands," she murmured. Ethan swallowed. "You can rest later. We have to keep moving." The factory responded to his words immediately. A long corridor ahead of them unlocked with a metallic shriek. The walls were darker here, blackened by soot and heat. Pipes ran overhead like exposed veins, occasionally venting bursts of steam that screamed as they escaped. Above the doorway, a sign flickered. "Night shift, hazard pay pending." No one laughed. As they crossed the threshold, the sounds changed. The factory's steady rhythm gave way to chaos, alarms chirping out of sync, machinery clanging unpredictably, lights flickering in uneven pulses. It felt unfinished. Unsafe. Like everything had been pushed too far, too fast. Jonah's recorder crackled violently, voices bleeding through the static. Not commands now, but arguments. "Please." Shouting supervisors and exhausted workers overlapping in a maddening chorus. "We told you it was overheating. Keep it running. There's pressure in the lines. Just finish the shift." Ethan's chest tightened as a memory forced its way in. He was standing in a control room, younger, less tired. Looking. Gauges were spiking. Warning lights flashed. A junior engineer stood beside him, pale, insisting something was wrong. Ethan remembered the annoyance he'd felt more than the concern. "If we shut it down now, we lose everything," he'd said. The memory warped. The gauges shattered. The heat hit him like a wall. Ethan stumbled forward, gasping, as the vision dissolved, but the heat remained. Real now. Tangible. The pipes overhead glowed faintly orange. Marla screamed. A section of the ceiling buckled and collapsed behind them, slamming down with crushing force. The path they'd come from vanished in a cloud of dust and sparks. Jonah stared at it, eyes wide. "It's cutting off exits," he whispered. "Like a safety failure cascade." "Then we go forward," Ethan said, though his voice shook. "We finish what it wants." They entered a massive chamber, the heart of the factory. The pressure system. Huge cylindrical tanks loomed overhead, their surfaces scarred and warped. Valves rattled violently, some stuck open, others jammed shut. Steam hissed from ruptures, filling the space with a shrill, constant scream. Workers lined the catwalks above, watching silently. At the center of the chamber was a control station, charred, half-melted, frozen in the exact state it had been the night of the accident. The loudspeaker crackled one final time, its voice distorted, strained. "Critical failure unresolved." Ethan knew what this was. "This is where it happened," he said. "This is where they died." The factory demanded not memory now, but responsibility. Jonah stepped forward, shaking. "If we shut it down, if we fix it." "There is no power source," Marla whispered. "We already know that." The lights flared violently, almost angrily. Ethan understood then. You don't want the system fixed, he said slowly. You want the decision corrected. The workers leaned in, eyes burning brighter. Ethan approached the control panel. His hands hovered over the warp switches, the same ones he had once chosen not to pull. The room pulsed with tension, every machine waiting. I chose profit, he said aloud, voice echoing. I chose deadlines over lives. The words felt like glass in his mouth. Marla crawled closer, tears streaking her face. And I approved expansions I knew were unsafe, she said. I signed papers I didn't read carefully enough because it was easier. Jonah swallowed hard. I buried reports, he added. Environmental impact. Worker exposure. I said it wasn't my job to stop them. The factory screamed. Steam blasted from the tanks, scalding the air. The pressure gauges spun wildly, needles snapping off. For a moment, Ethan thought they'd waited too long, that the factory would simply repeat the accident, over and over, forever. Then the machines began to slow. The lights dimmed from red to a sickly amber. The workers' expressions shifted, not peaceful, but attentive. Waiting. Ethan reached for the final switch. The emergency shutdown. The one that had never been used. His hand trembled as he pulled it. The factory shuddered violently, metal screaming as systems powered down that had not rested in decades. Conveyors ground to a halt. Pistons seized. The pressure tanks vented in long, exhausted sighs. Silence spread like a bruise fading. For the first time since they'd entered, the factory was quiet. The loudspeaker crackled weakly. Shift, incomplete. The lights did not turn off. The workers did not vanish. Ethan felt the truth settle in his gut, heavy and cold. Confession was not enough. Acknowledgement was not enough. Night shift wasn't over. It never was. And something deeper in the factory, something older than machines, older than policy, was still waiting to be paid. Silence in the factory felt wrong. It pressed against Ethan's ears until his own heartbeat sounded too loud, too alive. The machines stood still, yet the building itself seemed to breathe, slow, deliberate inhalations through cracks in the walls and exhalations that carried dust drifting like ash. The workers remained. They no longer stood at stations or along catwalks. They surrounded the central chamber in a wide, uneven circle, faces lifted toward Ethan, Marla, and Jonah. Their expressions were no longer empty or enraged. They were expectant. Marla pushed herself upright, leaning heavily against a railing. We did what it wanted, she said weakly. We admitted it. We shut it down. Jonah shook his head. His voice was barely above a whisper. No. We did what we needed to do. That's not the same thing. A deep vibration rolled through the floor, subtle but unmistakable. Not a machine starting, something structural, fundamental. The walls shuddered as hairline cracks spidered outward, glowing faintly from within. The factory was opening itself. A section of the far wall peeled apart with a sound like tearing flesh. Beyond it lay a space that hadn't existed before, a vast, dark hall descending downward, lit by dim industrial lamps that hummed with low voltage. A sign hung crookedly above the opening. Archives, Incident Records. Ethan felt his stomach twist. That's not part of the original layout. Jonah let out a bitter laugh. Neither is the rest of this. They moved forward because the factory allowed no alternatives. Each step downward felt heavier, as if they were walking against history itself. The air grew colder, damper. The smell changed, from oil and heat to mold, paper, and decay. Rows upon rows of filing cabinets stretched into the darkness. Thousands of them. Each drawer bore a name. Some were scratched in hastily. Others stamped cleanly in neat, corporate font. Ethan ran his fingers over one and recoiled at the chill that seeped into his skin. These are people, Marla said, her voice hollow. Not equipment. Not assets. Jonah opened a drawer. Inside was not paper, but a face. A man stared back at them, eyes wide, mouth frozen mid-scream. His features were flattened, pressed thin like a photograph laminated too tightly. Beneath him lay reports, forms, and memos, disciplinary notices, injury logs, termination letters. Written out of existence, Jonah murmured. Filed away. The lights flickered violently. The workers began to speak, not in unison, but overlapping, their voices filling the archive hall like a rising tide. They cut our hours on paper. They changed our titles. They said we were contractors. They said we weren't there. Ethan staggered as the truth hit him with crushing force. This was not just about death. It was about erasure. The factory did not demand guilt alone. It demanded proof that the dead had existed, that their lives had weight beyond productivity charts and profit margins. Marla fell to her knees, sobbing openly now. What do you want from us? She cried. Tell us how to fix it. The workers parted. From the darkness stepped a single figure, taller than the rest, its form indistinct, edges blurred like smoke trapped in human shape. Its face shifted constantly, cycling through dozens of features, men, women, young, old, none holding long enough to fully form. When it spoke, the sound came from everywhere. Progress was built on forgetting. The archives trembled as drawers slid open on their own. Faces stared out endlessly, row after row, an army of the unseen. You measured success in output, the voice continued. You priced time. You calculated risk. You decided who could be lost. Ethan felt himself pulled into another vision. A conference room. Charts climbing upward. Applause. Headlines praising efficiency and growth. And beneath it all, a footnote, a single line about an incident, minimized, sanitized. Acceptable losses. Ethan screamed as the vision collapsed. We can't undo it, he shouted. We can't bring you back. The figure tilted its shifting head. No, it said calmly. But you can carry us. The meaning slammed into him with horrifying clarity. We're not leaving, Jonah whispered. Are we? The lights flared blinding white. Ethan felt something tear inside him, not physically, but deeper. Memories that weren't his flooded in. Long shifts. Missed birthdays. Crushed fingers wrapped in rags and sent back to work. Names forgotten even by families who'd been told there was no record. Marla screamed as she collapsed again, clutching her chest. I can't, there's too many. One by one, the workers began to dissolve, not into peace, but into fragments of light that streamed toward Ethan, Jonah, and Marla. Each fragment carried weight, grief, memory. The factory was transferring the burden. Ethan fell to his knees, gasping as voices filled his mind, not screaming now, but whispering. Remember me. Say my name. Don't let them erase us again. The walls of the archive cracked and collapsed inward as the factory began to fold in on itself. The cabinets rusted instantly, disintegrating into ash that swirled upward like smoke being drawn into a lung. The figure was the last to fade. As it vanished, its final words echoed through the collapsing space. The cost was never paid. Darkness swallowed them. Ethan woke on cold ground beneath an open sky. Morning light filtered through gray clouds. Sirens wailed in the distance. Emergency vehicles clustered around the factory ruins, now nothing more than a collapsed skeleton of concrete and steel. Jonah lay nearby, unconscious but breathing. Marla coughed weakly, staring at her hands in horror. I remember all of them, she whispered. Every name. Ethan did too. And as he looked back at the ruins, he knew with terrible certainty. The factory was gone. But the work it had given them would never end. His head, not spoken, remembered. Ethan dropped his clipboard and walked out without explanation. From that day on, it followed him. Everywhere progress happened too quickly, where safety was negotiated instead of enforced, where corners were cut and lives reduced to metrics, Ethan felt it stirring. Factories. Warehouses. Data centers. Even offices where exhaustion passed for dedication. The factory had not been a place. It had been a system. And systems didn't die. They adapted. At night, Ethan wrote. He filled notebooks with names, some remembered clearly, others arriving as impressions, sensations, half-formed syllables that made his hands cramp as he forced them into ink. When he didn't write, the pressure returned. The noise grew louder. Don't let us be erased again. He tried once to stop. The next morning, he woke with his palms blistered, raw as if he'd worked machinery all night. He never tried again. Months later, the town announced plans for a memorial on the old factory site. A small plaque. A garden. A handful of officially recognized victims. 11 names. Ethan stood at the edge of the crowd during the unveiling, nausea rolling through him as applause broke out. He felt the weight inside him shift, uneasy, restless. This was not enough. That night, the dreams came stronger than ever. He stood inside the factory again, but it was different now. Endless rows of buildings stretched outward in every direction, merging and overlapping. Old factories bled into modern plants. Warehouses fused with hospitals, offices, schools. All of them working. All of them filled. The workers no longer looked dead. They looked like everyone. The voice returned, calm, vast, patient. Progress requires witnesses. Ethan woke screaming. By morning, he understood what had been done to him. He had not survived. He had been assigned. The factory hadn't wanted revenge. It hadn't wanted blood. It wanted continuity. Memory embedded where policy failed. A living record that could walk. The factory was officially declared a total loss. That was the phrase used in the reports, typed neatly beneath aerial photographs of twisted rebar and collapsed concrete. Structural failure. Unstable ground. Unsafe for reconstruction. Demolition unnecessary. Nature and time had already finished the job. Ethan read those words weeks later, sitting at his kitchen table, hands trembling slightly as he scrolled. Total loss. He almost laughed. Because some things don't disappear when buildings fall. They relocate. Since the collapse, Ethan no longer slept through the night. When he did sleep, it came in fragments, thin, shallow pieces filled with noise. Not screams. Not anymore. Machinery. Always machinery. A steady rhythm pulsing behind his thoughts. Not loud enough to wake him fully. Just enough to remind him it was still running somewhere. Marla stopped calling after the third week. The last time they spoke, her voice sounded older than it should have. She told him she'd quit the industry entirely. Sold her apartment. Couldn't be in buildings with more than one floor anymore. They breathe, she'd whispered before hanging up. Listen closely. They all breathe. Jonah vanished. Officially, he'd taken a leave of absence. Unofficially, his apartment was found empty, recorder left on the kitchen counter, still running. When Ethan listened to the audio, just once, he heard Jonah's voice calmly listing names for hours, pausing only to apologize when he forgot one. Ethan didn't go to the authorities. How could he explain that justice had been reassigned? The first sign it wasn't over came during a routine inspection downtown. A brand new distribution center, glass, steel, pristine efficiency. Ethan stood on the floor, reviewing stress tolerances, when the lights flickered. Just once. No one else reacted. But Ethan felt it. That familiar pressure behind his eyes. The faint smell of oil. A conveyor belt jerked slightly, correcting itself. Shift has begun, a voice whispered inside. Into boardrooms, audits, inspections, and feel when a line was about to be crossed. Ethan resigned from engineering 3 weeks later. He became a consultant. Then an advocate. Then a problem. He shut down projects before they began. Forced investigations. Named risks no one wanted named. When companies asked how he knew where failures would happen, he never answered. He didn't need to. They could see it in his eyes. Sometimes, late at night, when the weight inside him grows too heavy, Ethan hears the factory again, not roaring now, not angry. Working. Steady. Satisfied. And he knows, with absolute certainty, that when he finally dies, the burden won't vanish. It will be reassigned. Because the world is still building. Still rushing. Still forgetting. And somewhere, beneath the hum of modern progress, the haunted factory waits. Not in ruins. Not abandoned. But everywhere work is demanded without mercy. There is no final shutdown. Only the next shift.